Hi, I'm Martin from Greener Glens, and today I'm on the hunt for wild food. Now, because we're on lockdown, I've only got 1 hour to gather as many wild foods as I can, so I've set myself a challenge to gather as many as possible to make a lovely fresh salad for lunch. I'll be giving you some tips on identifying the plants I find, and some fun facts about them as well. I'll even be showing you how to eat some raw stinging nettle, and I'll be revealing the toxic truth about some of the most commonly accepted wild foods. Now, finding and eating wild foods doesn't have to be difficult, and I'm sure this video will give you a little bit more confidence to get out there and try some yourself. Making a fresh salad like this is a great way to bring the fresh new life of spring into your life. So stay tuned for that. Now, I'm fortunate to live along the side of some patches of woodland and sort of wooded field boundaries. I know some people will be locked down in places where you might not have so much green spaces around you, but a lot of the plants I'm going to look at today will be available in parks and along wooded streams near cities and big towns. So one of the first edible plants I spotted on my walk was this plant here with the white flowers. It looks a little bit like a stinging nettle, but it's actually a completely different plant called the white dead nettle. So down here we have one of the only real confusion species for common nettle, Urtica. It's the dead nettle, or white dead nettle. You can see it looks very, very similar, doesn't it? It's got leaves in pairs on opposite sides of the stem. The leaves are very, very similar, heavily toothed, slightly cordate at the base. And you can see why, have an evolutionary advantage by looking like a plant that stings you badly if you're attracted to herbivores. So it's not in the same family, it's the Avium album, so it's a completely different family, but you can see why you would mistake that for a common nettle, especially when there's no flowers on it. The biggest difference between this and the stinging nettle, apart from the fact that it has no stings, is the flowers. Look how pretty those are, and those are very different to the drab sort of green and purplish drupes that come off the common nettle. There is actually a common nettle growing amongst all these white dead nettles, and I can show you it here. And you can see really how similar they are, but hopefully you can also see some of these subtle differences. And these little flowers are a great little wayside snack. The nice sunny days, they've got a little bit of, well of nectar in it, and you really get that nice sweet hit, which is why you can hear the bees buzzing around me. That's another name for another common name is the bee nettle, because the bees and some long-tongued species of moth really, really like this, because they can go down and get a lovely little drink of nectar. So those leaves can be cooked like spinach. They don't sting you, so you don't have to worry about deadening the hairs before you eat them. And they do taste a little bit like spinach. The stems are kind of square, and they're not quite as strong fibres as the common nettle, but again, these can be used for the fibrous qualities in bushcraft, so that's quite interesting as well. So you go, that's Avium album. So that's great. I'm going to take some of these for later. And along with the sweetness from the flowers, that raw taste will give my salad some substance. So here we have another edible plant from the hedgerows. This is Allaria Petiolata, which is one of the prettiest Latin names that I know for any wild food. And it's Jack by the hedge, or hedge garlic, poor man's garlic. The best name, I think, best common name that describes this is garlic mustard, and that's because it is a mustard. It's a member of the Brassica family, and you can tell that, it looks like a brassica, it looks like a mustard. It grows tall, and it's got that same sort of mustardy flavour with a little touch of garlic. The garlic flavour is not as much as, say, wild garlic or some of the alliums, Allium paradoxum or such. This is the second year's growth. They're a biannual, so first year they sort of grow lower to the ground with a little bit rounder leaves. I'll show you that in the video in a minute. And then when they flower the next year and they seed, they put out these tall stems like this with flowers on top, these little flowers with 4 petals on them. So this whole plant is edible. It's got a garlicky flavour, but it can vary in intensity, I find, and sometimes it has a little bit of a aftertaste of maybe aspirin or paracetamol. It bothers some people. I find it fine, it doesn't bother me at all. And one of my favourite uses for this is to actually gather some and make it into a quiche. It goes really, really well with eggs, I think, as does a lot of garlic. Now, another one that's common names is Jack by the hedge. Now, this also makes sense because it grows very often beside hedges. And Jack comes from, it's an old English term to describe the devil. The flavour of garlic was associated with the devil because it was said that the devil's breath smelled like garlic. But considering how many people have used this for food and flavouring and its medicinal purposes, this and other garlics over the years, I imagine most people's breath would smell like garlic back then. So I'm not sure how much that makes sense, but it's quite a nice little name. Now obviously there's other brassicas you can maybe confuse this with, but once it flowers it's quite difficult to confuse it with anything. One thing you might confuse it with is Honesty, Lunaria annua, and that's because it's got a very similar shape, and when it flowers you're probably not going to confuse it. And obviously the seed pods, you know, the penny silver seed pods, you're not going to confuse it with. And also you don't have to panic with that because Honesty is edible as well, so you don't have to panic. Now this is good cooked as well as a raw addition to a salad. The flowers can be used, and also the seeds can be used a bit like mustard seeds later on. Yep, and that's that gentle garlic flavour, and that sort of, it's a flavour that a lot of different plants have got. It's kind of herbally, very botanical. Some people say it tastes like paracetamol. I don't think it tastes like paracetamol. I haven't managed to quite narrow down where it is. But I find it mellows with cooking, so it's probably better off to cook it. But a couple of little slices of that chopped up in my salad for later will be just lovely. So I'm just going to pick off the leaves and the flowers, and I'll discard this stem. I've just realised what the flavour is. It's very strong raw spinach. That's what the aftertaste is like for me, personally. So I spotted another little wild edible down here I wanted to show you. Now this is one of my personal favourites.
It's dog violet, Viola raviniana.
Now this is one of my favourite little nibbles that grow quite often in sort of shady woodland, hence we're under the canopy right now, and the leaves of this have a lovely flavour. Yeah, really nice. Sweet, leafy, full of sugar, full of nutrients. Really nice fresh flavour. That's really good. Now, when it's in flower, it's really difficult to misidentify this with anything else. Maybe winter heliotrope, best to identify it when it's in flower, so you don't confuse it with that. That's a really nice one. There's not so much of it here, so I'm probably not going to take it for my little well food meal later on, but it's nice for a little nibble. So I'm glad I got to show you that. So the next well food I've found is this. This is common gorse, or Ulex europaeus. Now, this is a really easy plant to identify. It's everywhere, it flowers all through the year, and when you get a warm breeze through it, you get that lovely smell of coconutty, you know, almondy, and they have that flavour as well. Now, I will say this, the buds and the flowers are edible. You shouldn't eat too many of them. They contain varying small amounts of toxic alkaloids, so be careful with this. I see a lot of people using it to make cordial and wine, gorse, you know, gorse bud or gorse flower wine. I would advise caution with that because the toxic alkaloids could possibly build up in higher amounts there, and you could possibly run into some problems. But a couple of these picked and thrown into a salad later on is not going to do you any harm. Yeah, it's fruity, coconutty, very sweet, it's nice. Obviously beautiful flower as well. So I'm going to take a couple of them for my salad. So another little edible flower that you might see along the hedgerows right now is cowslip, Primula veris. It's very, very pretty, look, it's down here. It's difficult to decipher this from primrose actually, if it wasn't for the flowering stems. You know, primroses have sort of low growing yellow flowers, a little bit paler than this. These ones have trumpeted flowers, and it's on a long stem, you know, and also there's multiple flowers per stem, you know. Primroses generally have just 1 or 2 flowers per stem.
There is another relative of the primrose that looks even more similar to both plants, called oxlip, which has paler, less bell-shaped flowers than cowslip. All 3 plants are edible, so no need to worry about a false ID.
It's like a very pretty addition to a salad or something. The flowers have a sort of botanical but sweet and zesty sort of flavour, tiny little hint of citrus. And the leaves are really, really nice. They're nice and soft, especially the young ones. Again, it's got that sort of botanical flavour. A little bit bitter, a little bit sweet, tiny little bit of zest. So that's going to be a really nice little addition to my salad today. So the most of you, this next plant won't need any introduction. It's Japanese knotweed, Japonica. This is a much hated invasive species from Asia. It's much hated because it takes over vast swathes of land and breaks up concrete. But it's really quite an amazing plant. And to be honest, I think we're never going to get rid of this now. It's just here, there's too much of it now. The control methods by the council and other local authorities and businesses is not doing the trick. It's really, really a strong plant. So if it's here to stay, we might as well learn how to utilise it. Now, one of the good things about it is it's actually edible. It is used as a fodder plant in Asia for cattle and sheep, but it's something that we can use as well when it's very fresh. Now, when these shoots are under sort of ½ metre high, you can harvest them and use them a little bit like rhubarb. And they taste a little bit like rhubarb, but quite tart with a little bit of fruitiness. and you can peel off this outer sort of fibrous layer, and the inner parts of the stem are actually quite nice. You can push that through a sieve and make a nice full out of it, so make a nice puree. There's loads of different things you can use it for. It's savoury and you can use it sweet. Again, you'd use it a bit like rhubarb, you would sort of simmer it with some sugar. But obviously with other wild foods, it comes with a warning. It's one of these plants, because of that tartness, it's got quite high levels of oxalic acid, so those of you with kidney problems out there should maybe not eat too much of it. Also, it's a Schedule 9 invasive species, so to cut this and then cause it to spread to somewhere else is actually illegal. And obviously it's very, very ecologically damaging as well. So what you should do, if you're going to harvest some of this, make sure you do not disturb the roots or the rhizomes. Those are the most invasive part, and they can spread and make a whole new colony from a piece as big as my little finger. So really be careful of that. And what you want to do is, if any bit of parts you don't cook, burn them and make sure that there's absolutely nothing left. And whatever you do, do not plant it anywhere. Best just not to disturb it. Another word of warning is that because there's been so much control of this plant, it's not 100% that the plant that you're going to be harvesting from is going to be herbicide free. You know, this glyphosate's used a lot to control this. They inject it into the stem or spray it on the leaves, and you don't really want to eat it at that point. I don't even eat it even after a year, you know, the year after where the glyphosate has been applied. Now this is right next to a field boundary, so I won't be using this today because I fear that it may have been sprayed with something at some point, if not this season, certainly last season. So I'm going to leave this for now, but maybe another fresher patch somewhere else I can use. So another very common wild edible that's out this time of year is beech leaves, and this is off a tree called Fagus sylvatica. Very, very common, it's around everywhere. Now when the leaves are like this, when they're very young and still hairy, they're almost translucent, you know, when they're breaking the buds, and they're edible at this stage. Now I personally find them a little bit tasteless, especially at the beginning. The flavour comes through later, a little bit citrusy, and it's a way of padding out a wild salad. I'm not immensely fussed by them, but they are edible at this stage. They become a bit toxic later on when they mature. But one of the things it's really good for is making one of the best early spring liqueurs. It's one of those liqueurs that you infuse, so you get a load of beech leaves and you infuse it in gin and brandy and sugar. And after a couple of weeks you get a really, really nice brew. It's almost like a subtler Benedictine, if you've ever had that. For those of you who are fans of the French brewer monks, the leaves have got a sort of botanical taste, but also with a little tiny bit of citrus. And I'll be back later on to harvest a few more of those to make with that. It's called Noyo. Very nice. Now, one of my favourite wayside nibbles that is available right now is this. Now this is wych elm, or Ulmus glabra, or sometimes called the Scots elm. And right now it's seeding. It's covered in these tiny little seeds called samaras. Now these are little seeds with a sort of little winged case on it, but when they're green like this, you can eat them raw. And they taste great. They're really, really good to me. They're sweet, almost kind of cucumbery. Really, really nice, and there's loads of them and they're dead easy to harvest. Straight off a tree, straight in your mouth. Really, really nice. The tree itself's got loads of different uses as well. The leaves are edible when they're very, very young. I'm not that keen on them. But the bark is really, really useful. It can be stripped off and made into cords. Obviously you don't want to do that to live trees, but if you're harvesting it anyway. It can also be used to make baskets, you know, sort of bark containers. The wood's very hard and tough, but quite pliable as well. So it makes really, really good bows, and it's good for building things. You don't see very many of the larger specimens anymore because the Dutch elm disease wiped a lot of them out. But these small ones that are too small for the elm bark beetles to really be bothered with can still be seen alongside of woodlands and sort of field boundaries like this. I'm going to gather a whole load of these because they don't really keep that well fresh. So I'm going to harvest a load of them and take them back and use them for my salad today. They can be used when they go brown. You can break them open and eat the seed inside. But right now, why would you not eat them? Because they're so easy to eat and really, really tasty. Now this is a rather unusual find to find out in the woods, but you do occasionally find it, generally around very old dwellings that are maybe been overgrown by the woodland or something. But this is rhubarb, Rhabarbarum. It's very unusual to find this here. I certainly wasn't expecting it, and it's grown amongst a load of other wild foods as well. We've got ground elder down here as well, Urtica as well, the common stinging nettle. So there's lots of little wild foods around here. There's also some peony roses growing along there, so I imagine maybe some of this soil has came from a garden or something that someone's dumped over the side here. But I'm miles away from anywhere where you find a garden, so it's odd. Unusual or not, it's very welcome because the stems can be made into delicious pudding. You know, this is the rhubarb that you would buy in the shops or down the market. Very, very nice to see this. So I'm going to take a couple of stems of this and I'm going to make it into maybe a little dessert for my meal later. Now, this is late April, so it's a perfect time to harvest these because as they get into the summer, they become a little less tasty and they start to go a bit woody, you know, so this is the perfect time to harvest. So I'm going to take maybe as many as 2 or 3 stems from each plant. I don't want to take too many because it might be a little bit too hard on the plant. Now again, with any of these kind of really tart flavoured plants, they have a lot of oxalates in them, so again, don't eat too many of these. Now there are some large leaf plants that you might confuse this with, probably the main one being burdock, you know, Arctium lapa or Arctium minus, you know, the lesser and greater burdock. This is sometimes called the wild rhubarb, as you can eat the young stalks and obviously the very big and delicious root.
Which was undoubtedly an important food source for our ancestors, but also more recently.
Dandelion and burdock drinks still being available in some places. And heaven forbid that you would confuse this with any of the larger leaves, poisonous plants like giant hogweed. But because of the heart-shaped leaves and the red stems, I think you should be able to make a positive identification of this if you find it. Anyway, I'm going to take a couple of stems, or petioles, from this rhubarb, and I'll take it back and make a lovely dessert for later. Not bad little harvest there at all. Lovely.
And we actually ended up making a delicious rhubarb crumble with the rhubarb. It was really nice.
So again, I couldn't help myself here. This is not one of the wild foods I'm going to use today, but I just thought I'd mention it because it's so beautiful this time of year. And let me tell you, the smell standing in amongst all these flowers is amazing. Really, really floral and sweet, lovely. So it's bird cherry, it's Prunus Padus. You can tell that from the shape of the leaves, and the shape of the flowers is very, very obvious. It's usually a very small tree, it doesn't grow as big as the other wild cherries. And this has actually been an important wild food historically. Now, in a lot of publications you'll hear that it's poisonous, and yes, it does contain a lot of poisonous elements like amygdalin, you know, which obviously releases hydrogen cyanide, which just gives it that almond flavour, and there's also a couple of other dangerous chemicals within the seeds as well. Now, that almond taste is maybe a little alarming, but it's also very pleasant. I mean, things like marzipan, for example. Most marzipan these days is that the flavouring is made from the detoxified kernels of fruit like bird cherries. It's mostly things like apricots and things. All these fruits have the same sort of chemicals in their nuts. Cherries, bird cherry, apricots, etc. So how the berries were used historically was that they were gathered, they were crushed up with the stone and all, and then they were cooked until all that almond smell completely disappeared, and then they were safe to store and eat for many, many months. And I have to say, they are very, very tasty. But again, it's not something I can use today, so I just wanted to give you a little look at this and a wee bit of information. And maybe I'll have a tiny little nibble of some of the petals. That's nice, very floral again, very sweet. But I'll be back in the autumn to harvest the berries. So another rather unusual wild food plant I've stumbled upon in the woods is this. This is the flowering currant, or Abies sanguineum. Now this is one you would see very often in gardens. There's loads in the gardens around about me. But it's not something I generally see in woodlands, but I see its wild cousins, you know, the black currant and such, very, very often. But this is quite a useful little wild food plant, and it's something that I use every year. Now what I usually use is the flowers. Now flowers are absolutely delicious. This one doesn't have such heavy flowers. I think maybe just coming to the end of its flowering right now. They're usually in really, really heavy drupes that you can harvest a lot really quickly. And you can use the young leaves. They can be eaten raw. I have a lovely fruity flavour, really, really nice and juicy. And the flowers are the star of the show though, because they are so full of nectar, so full of fruity sweetness. They're really, really nice. And what I use these for is I use them to make a very nice cordial, which I then use to mix a very, very nice rum cocktail. I've already made my cordial for this year, so what I'm going to do with these ones, if I can find some good ones, I'll just take them again as a sort of floral dressing to the salad. Maybe I'll put in a couple of the small leaves as well, because they're really tasty. Glad I found that. So while I'm on this little slope here, I thought I would mention a couple of the little wild foods while we're here, since they're right next to me. Now, you can probably see them behind me. One of them is the common stinging nettle, Urtica dioica. Lovely fresh leaves on this one here, so I'm actually going to show you how to eat this raw. It's not something I generally do, but since I'm doing a video, maybe I'll have a go at it. The problem is with the stinging nettle, eating it raw, is the trichomes, you know, the little tiny needles of silica that inject you with a lovely cocktail of nastiness to give you that sting. Now, those trichomes can be broken, so you have to be a bit forceful with it. You have to be confident. You have to grab the leaf from the top, because the top has much less of the trichomes than the bottom of the leaf, and then you have to crush it down. And once you've crushed it, and I mean you've got to crush the heck out of it, you can eat it raw. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. I might regret this. So I'm going to take one of these young leaves, I'm going to grasp it from the top, and I'm going to pick it confidently. Now I'm not stung yet, nothing's been stung. So the little trichromes, or little hairs, grow in the direction of the leaf growth. So they grow this way. So if the stem is my hand, it grows away from the stem. So you want to flatten them in that direction initially, just so that they don't spike you. So right now I'm not getting stung at all here. Not getting stung. And that's looking good. Now the next thing to do, oops, I almost tore it. Next thing to do is to fold it once these are flat. So fold it and crush it. So I'm folding it, I'm crushing it. I'm just going to watch out this a little bit. It's trying to escape. Again, no stings, not at all, nothing. Another fold. Another fold. I'm really going to crush this down, you know, get my nail in there and really give it a good old crush. Another fold, and it's getting very small now. Very small. Make sure every single little bit of it has been bent and crushed. Now you do that as many times as you can. There probably is a limit to what you can do. I imagine you probably would do about 6 to 8 times before it just becomes a fibrous wet mass in between your fingertips, which is kind of what this is like now. And so there we go. That is now edible. No sting whatsoever. Quite nice, really. Because it's young, the flavour is a lot more subtle than what it is when it's a bit older. And you certainly don't want to eat it after it's flowered, but at this time of year it's perfect for eating. So once it flowers, it produces a couple of chemicals that are not really great. It creates rods of calcium carbonate that can interfere with liver function. You know, you can form stones and stuff like that, and it becomes generally too fibrous to eat anyway. So it's best to get it when it's young like this. If you pick the top out of them and you steam them like a spinach, they are really tasty and very good for you. Watch my video specifically on nettles for more information on them. Now another one of the things that's around here is, I don't know if you can see it down here, they're quite small right now, and again this is a good time to eat them. It's this. Now again, you might recognise this from when you're a kid. This is cleavers, goosegrass, or as they're known up here, sticky willies. And this is Gallium aperine. And it's very sticky. I mean, I can just throw this on, oops, that didn't work very well. I can throw this onto my top and it will stick. That's why it gets the name sticky willies or cleavers, and the little seeds do the exact same thing. It's to spread itself. But these, despite them being quite wiry when they're young, are edible as well. And they're fairly nice. Juicy. Easy to eat. Slight herbally flavour. And it's supposed to be very good for you, particularly your liver. So I might take a couple of these very young shoots and take them back with me to add a bit of bite to my salad. So that was good. I'm glad I got to show you that. So the next little wild food I found for you here is not something I'm going to use today, but I'm going to mention it because it's one of my favourites. This is elder, Sambucus nigra. You can see it up there. It's not got too many leaves on it, this one. It's a lot of moss on it. Maybe it's not the best of specimens. You tend to find them quite often like this with a lot of deadwood in them, but that deadwood has benefits and we can utilise it in a couple of different ways. One of the ways we can benefit from it is it grows a lot of mushrooms. One of the most prolific ones is this, the wood ear or jelly ear fungus, Auricularia, Auricula-Judae. Fungus down here, the jelly ear.
And if you want to know more about this fungus, I have a separate video on the Greener Glens YouTube channel on wood ears and how to make them into boozy, chocolate covered sweeties.
So that's one of the useful things. It's quite a good firewood as well. It burns quite well. But I'm not going to use those today because they are a little bit dry and I can find some better specimens than that.
In fact, there was an old elm stem just 100 yards away that was absolutely riddled with them.
Not a tremendous amount of flavour on those, but they are good for adding sort of thickness and a sort of mushroomy flavour to stalks and things like that. Another good thing about this deadwood is that it actually makes quite a good friction fire lighting wood. You know, nice straight bits like that, deadwood, make quite good hand drill fire starting sets. So I'm going to take this section here and I'm going to make it into a fire drill set later. But one of the reasons why I wanted to mention it as wild food is elder creates one of the nicest flavours, I think, from the wild food larder, and it's the flowers first and then the berries afterwards. The flowers for me are a fantastic flavour. I love that flavour, and I love to make sparkling wine with it. I've got a video on that coming out as well, so keep your eyes open for that. It's just one of my favourite flavours. It's really nice.
I make lots of different products with elderflowers, including ice lollies, cordials, and a delicious alternative to Turkish delight, and I'll have a video on how to make this elderflower delight out shortly.
And obviously the berries can be used afterwards as well, and they've got a similar sort of flavour, but much more rich, much less fresh and more a rich flavour. I'll be coming back here when the time's right. Right, on to the next wild food. So this next wild food shouldn't need much introduction. This is wild garlic, or Allium ursinum. This is one of the most widely known edible wild plants in Britain. One of the reasons is because it's so easily identified and because it's so prolific. There's loads of it everywhere. Also known as ramsons, bear garlic, bear leek, broadleaf garlic. There's a whole host of different names. The smell is often the first sign of this plant, as you smell it even before you see it. And when you see it, it's usually a massive patch of glossy green, bright green leaves carpeting the forest floor with lovely little either white and green flower buds or lovely globe-like white flowers like this one. The leaves carpet the woodland floor. They like moist woodland. I found them in dry woodland as well, but where I most likely find them in Scotland is along the side of streams and rivers. They seem to like the dampness down here. Now this is our native wild garlic. It's more like an onion than a garlic. The whole plant is edible. And it tastes like, obviously, like an onion garlicky flavour, but it's got a hit of chilli as well. You know, the onion taste is so strong that it's almost, you know, got the heat of a chilli. So if you're going to use this plant raw, use it sparingly. I'll use some of the young leaves and the flower heads in my salad today, and I'm going to take a lot more home to preserve and use later on in the year. It's a fantastic plant. It's no wonder it's so popular amongst foragers. It can be used to make so many delicious wild food dishes.
Here's just some of the ways I preserve the wild garlic. One of which is a delicious pesto. I also dry the leaves to be used as a flavouring throughout the year. And I salt and pickle the buds in a light vinegar, sugar and water mix. And I'll have some videos on how to do all of these shortly.
So the next little wild edible that's around at this time of year is this. Now this is Prunus Avium. This is the wild cherry. Those sort of pink ones you see along the sides of roads and cities and stuff like those are the Japanese variety. This is a native variety, and obviously we're going to have some edible yet sour berries off these later on. You know, the cherries are quite small, not like the big fat ones you buy in the supermarket, but these little flower petals are edible at this time of year, and they're really nice, very sweet but subtle, you know, delicate. A little bit of nectar in there, a little bit of a almond tree cyanide sort of flavour. You don't want to eat too much of these. But what these are really good for is a really nice edible garnish, as with most of the flowers I've got today. So I'm going to take a couple of these and scatter them on my salad. So again, I'm going to cover another plant that's considered edible that I'm not going to use today. And I think there's a lot of misinformation about this plant out there, so I'd really like to give you some more information on it, because I think that portraying it as edible, as an edible wild plant that you can use freely, is very misleading and potentially dangerous. So it's this behind me. I don't know if you can see it. It's quite a small plant, ground cover plant. There you go. See the little yellow flower? It's Lesser Celandine, or Auricula-Judae Fragaria. Now, I see a lot of bushcrafters, wild food amateurs saying that this food is widely edible, but it's a ranunculate, so it's part of the buttercup family, which is a toxic family, particularly to humans. It produces a lot of chemicals to prevent it from being eaten by herbivores, and a lot of these chemicals are they're in low amounts, but they're quite dangerous to us. It's one of these wild foods that you can get away with eating, but the chemicals that are in it are really pretty toxic to us. It's a fairly well known wild edible plant in amongst the bushcraft community because of certain famous bushcrafters, but again, I think it's misleading to say that this is freely edible. I look at it more like a survival food rather than a readily usable wild food, and I'll explain why. So everyone's heard that you can use the young leaves of this plant like a spinach, or possibly even eat them raw, and you can take the bulbos, root bulbos, and roast them and then eat them raw like a potato. And yes, you can do that, but some of the toxic elements in these, some of the alkaloid, can cause some kinds of cancers and liver damage. That doesn't sound like a very nice wild food to me. And also, once it's flowered, the plant produces another compound called protoanemonin. Now this is yet another protective compound that the plant releases to inhibit grazing of it by herbivores. And protoanemonin will also irritate your mouth and your gastric system. So again, it's one of these plants that when I see people saying that they're edible, I always think, why are they not given a warning with this? You know, yes, you can eat it in very small amounts, but it's not something you want to be eating a lot of. And I personally wouldn't bother with it because there's loads of other much better wild foods out there than that. It's also become a very virulent invasive species in America as well, and it's really a bit of a pain of a plant. So I would recommend you leave this plant alone and don't listen to everything that you hear on YouTube. Do your own research and don't believe what every person says on YouTube, including me. Do your own research as well. So I didn't have to come far to find my next wild food. In fact, there's only a couple of paces. This time of year, the forest and hedgerows and field margins are so full of wild foods. Literally every single direction I look in, I can see wild foods. I've got nettles down here, I've got hogweed, I've got this behind me. I've got nettles, I've got dock, we've got, what else have we got? There's Lesser Celandine down there. Yeah, there's a ton of wild foods. Anyway, the one I stopped here to talk about is this. This is Hawthorn, Crataegus Monogyna. Crataegus Monogyna. And there's a couple of little things that are edible about it. Now, the leaves, when they are very young, are edible. These ones are getting a little bit too old. I find that the flavour increases a little bit more and become a bit more tough to, to chew. And at that point, I find them to be slightly less edible. But when they're really, really young, when they're just coming out, they're really, really nice. When they're very delicate and almost translucent, they're really nice. But also, the flowers are edible, and later on, the berries are going to be edible as well. Hawthorn berries, or haws. Now they're quite nice. The flesh kind of looks a little bit like avocado. It's got a red skin. One of the berries you can find quite often throughout the entire year almost. It's probably less often to see it now, since all the birds will have picked them all clean by now. But during the winter you can see them, and obviously during the autumn as well, when they come out you can see them as well. And they make a very, very nice fruit leather, and also a very nice ketchup as well. And you can search the internet for recipes on that. It's very, very nice, and I would recommend using them because there's tons of them. But anyway, that's our next wild food. So this next little bit of wild food I've found for you is the Norway spruce. This is obviously a non-native variety of the UK, but it's very, very common here. Picea Abies is the scientific name. One of the surprising things about this tree is that it's completely non-toxic. The buds are edible, the needles are edible, also the inner cambium is edible as well. That was an important food during the winter, traditionally, where it came from. But what I'm interested in right now is these. You see how the ends of these are bright green compared to the older needles? These are the fresh, new needles that are coming out just this season. Now, those are really, really nice. I can have a taste of these raw. The most common thing to do with them is to flavour things with them. You can flavour alcoholic drinks with it, but you can also make a really, really nice tea with it. Oh, it's quite strong. Obviously a kind of resinous flavour. A little bit citrusy. Very highly flavoursome. It's kind of like juniper berries, that sort of real resinous taste, and they're very strong, so you only need to use a little bit. I'm maybe going to take a couple of those and just sprinkle them in my salad. And that will give me another little lemony, zesty hit to add to the flavour. It's nice, it's quite astringent. Sort of dried the side of my mouth out that I was chewing that with. I need a wee drink of water after that. Very nice. They're nice, aren't they? Nice little green buds. That's probably enough for me now.
Well, my hour is up, and so I'm heading back to the kitchen to make my salad and reap the benefits of all that foraging. But before that, let's quickly look at some of the edible plants I saw but didn't have time to cover in the hour. Like this wild strawberry. It has no fruit yet, but the leaves have medicinal uses. Or dandelion. You can pretty much eat this whole plant. And dandelion coffee is an interesting use of the root. I spotted a few leaves of common hogweed, and there was plenty of ground elder around. I saw some wood avens that have a clove flavoured root. And there is some northern willow herb. I found the first year's leaves of burdock that I mentioned with the rhubarb. And although these raspberry plants have no fruits yet, I could have used the leaves in a nice tea. One of the plants I did gather but didn't include was this few flowered leek. I'll have a separate video on alliums coming out soon. So, back to the kitchen to sort out the spoils.
noticed there that I actually had a cool block in my bag. One of the big problems with harvesting wild foods on the hot days like this, when you put them in bags, they can go off even faster because they heat up. So I just put that in there, and that helped keep them cool so that they're nice and fresh by the time I go home. So obviously all of these leaves and stuff like that are just been freshly harvested, so the first thing to do is to give them all a good wash. Get rid of any dirt and possible contaminants and any insects. Well, that's quite a little haul. It's quite exciting all this, having so many wild foods ready to go all at once. So yeah, I've got them all washed and they are in separate bowls just so that you can have a little look at them. That's the wild garlic buds there. I'm going to pickle most of these buds, but I'll need to salt them for a few days first to dry them out. But I'll use some of the flowers for the salad, so I'll put them aside. That's the beech leaves there. They're all washed and ready to go. That is the cowslip leaves. I've got cowslip flowers in that little bowl there as well. That is just a little handful of the few flowered leek that I grabbed. I've got the dead nettles there. You can see the white flowers are still on it. I'll take the flowers and the leaves off of the stem first before I add it to anything. And that is going to be the bulk of my salad. That has been, most of these have been washed and dried because they go off super fast if they're left wet. And that's the elm seeds. And that is my Jack by the Hedge. And it's washed well. It's not as dry, but hopefully I can't use all of that at once either, so I'll probably preserve some of that. And obviously my rhubarb that I found all washed and looking good as well. It's quite a lot of that, so I'm going to have to make some sort of preserve with that as well, or some sort of dessert. So good, let's make our salad then. This is fun, I feel like a celebrity chef. Okay, so we're going to say that that is our bulk. And this is just going to be for me right now. I'm not going to make one for several people. I'm just going to try it. The Primula leaves are going to go in. I'm going to save a couple because I want the missus to try it later on. Okay, handful of beech leaves. In fact, I'm just going to put all of them in. I'm not going to put all of my few flowered leek in because they're maybe a little bit strong. I'll probably put about half in. There we go. And I'm going to tear off dead nettle leaves and chuck them in with some flowers. Any leaves that I don't use for salad, I will cook them like spinach. I'll just wilt them basically. Some steam for dinner later on. I'm going to put in a couple of these Jack by the Hedge leaves. I'm just going to tear them up first so they don't get enormous big leaves. The leaves on this are really big. Chuck a few of them in, tear them up nicely. See the size of some of them, almost as big as my hand. Okay, tear that, get that up in there. And maybe one or two of the wild garlic buds, but these are pretty strong, so I'm not going to put many in them. They're also enormous. And I'm maybe going to chop up two of the leaves and mix that through as well. As well. I'm going to put some of these flowers in and I'll put some on top because you need to make it look good, don't you? So now I'm going to add one or two ingredients from the house just to increase the calorific content in this because I'm quite hungry right now. So that's just a mix of croutons, pine nuts and walnuts. Go in there, lovely jubbly. And every salad needs some oil. I don't tend to put dressings on salads because I think it just overpowers the flavour. I think if you've got good flavours already, you don't necessarily need a dressing. But what I do like to put on is some oil, and that is just some avocado oil. I really like that in a salad. I know it's slightly ridiculous putting it on a wild food salad, but you know, there's no points to be gained by roughing it. And I know this is controversial, but I always salt and pepper my salad. It's going to go straight in me right now, so I don't have to worry about it pulling any of the juices out or anything. And it intensifies the flavours as well. Looks good, doesn't it? So there we go, I can't tell you I am looking forward to tucking in this. That's really good. That's spring in a bowl right there. There we go, so that was my lockdown salad challenge. I can't remember how many wild foods we actually saw in the end. I'll count it up in the editing, but I hope you enjoyed it. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy foraging! And happy eating.